Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly chats. It's 3 o'clock on Tuesday, but for most of you, you might be watching later, and that's great. Again, if you want to be in on the updates of what topics we're going to talk about each week, just make sure you're following this page, or liking the page and share it. Feel free to share with folks. And thanks for the feedback again. This is a great opportunity for me to have a little break from my staring at a computer screen all day and researching and things like that. So I really enjoy it. Today's topic came from an interview I recently did with the East Aurora Bee. They had called me about a woman that I had written about and researched a couple years ago. And her name is Mary Taylor, Mary Jean Taylor. And the Bee was looking for articles related to Black History Month. February's Black History Month, and so they were looking for some article ideas. And I've written about Mary Taylor, and she was believed to be the first black graduate of East Aurora High School. Um, and the reason she was we were I was kind of introduced to her is there's a photograph, and actually I put her in my book Aurora Revisited. The glare off of there she is, and I'm also going to put her picture in the comments, and she was in the her portrait was in the preview for this video. But the Bee had been they published some photographs from my books, as well as some pictures from the archives at the town hall. But they put her picture in the memories, the past and pictures that they have, and they used the caption that I had in the book. Um, and unfortunately, the caption from the Aurora Revisited book, I think I wrote in 2011. And at the time, I didn't know a lot about Mary Taylor, and I had written that in the book. So I had her picture, and I said that she graduated from 1901 from East Aurora High School, believed to be the first black graduate, and that she was active in the Baptist Church, and that not a whole lot of more information was known about her. And at the time, that was true. And the reason we have that information was that was what was written on the back of the portrait, the original portrait that is in the archives of the town historian's office. So someone had handwritten on the back, believed to be the first black graduate, 1901. So I wanted to do a little more research on her, and I have talked about her before, I believe, with other topics, but I wanted to devote, because she and what she did in East Aurora and her accomplishments were brought up through this interview with the Bee. Um, and I thought, well, what a great person to talk about. And so sometimes there's a reason why certain topics come up, and maybe we need to revisit them. And people come up, and we need to revisit these people from our past. Um, so that's all I knew about her in 2011 when I wrote that book. So I delved a little deeper, and tried to find more information about her. First off, to confirm that that she was indeed the first black graduate of East Aurora High School, and just wanted to know more about her, where she went, where her family, what her family did, what her parents did as occupations here in East Aurora. Just as I do with any topic, I want to just know as much as I possibly can find out. So I delved into the newspaper archives, and one of the first things I discovered is the reason why we probably couldn't find her, is that little notation on the back of the photograph, handwritten notation. And again, I have no idea who wrote that on the back of a photograph, and how many times does that happen. Um, had the wrong graduation date. So I was looking in the wrong year, was trying to find her in the wrong year, and of course that won't show up. Our yearbooks back then don't have photographs of the students, so that was a dead end. So I eventually found her in 1902 in the list of graduates. So what is great is the East Aurora Advertiser, um, and a lot of community newspapers will publish in June, even if you don't have yearbooks for your high school. So this goes beyond this goes beyond uh, East Aurora and just East Aurora schools, but any small community that has a newspaper, if you don't have high school yearbooks available, the newspaper almost always will list the graduates in June because the community's proud of them, and commencement is a big event in the community. So I found her in that listing for 1902, and that would be why she wasn't. I couldn't find her anywhere else. So what was wonderful is that the Easter Advertiser, as it has done since it was published at the beginning, and actually the Advertiser predates the Union School, the public school here in East Aurora. So for every graduation, they've put in a little blurb, sometimes bigger than other times, about the upcoming graduation. And then after the graduation ceremony, they generally put a recap of it. And in that recap for 1901, I was able to find details about Miss Taylor's graduation. And what I found out, which was very interesting, is not only did she graduate, she gave an oration. What they would do at graduations back then is a select group of students would get up and recite something that they've written, and she was one of them. And so they talked about it. And what I found out in just that little article, that little paragraph, that one paragraph, it was a larger article, but the one paragraph about Mary Taylor um, not only told us about what she spoke about at graduation and confirmed that she graduated, but also really gave us a sense of what the community was like for a black student in a predominantly white community. And of course, it's still the same way today. But back then, and I'll tell you a little bit how I was able to figure out how predominantly white we were in East Aurora at the time that she graduated. Um, but the article talked about she recited a essay up from slavery, and she talked about Booker T. Washington. Now, up from Slavery is also Booker T. Washington's autobiography. So at first, and actually a reporter from the Bee, the editor of the East Aurora Bee, had asked me, now, did she recite her own essay or did she recite Booker T. Washington's autobiography? But the article in the East Aurora Advertiser actually talks about her talking about Booker T. Washington and slavery and how black people, the struggles of black people in our nation. And remember, this is just at the turn of the century. Um, and she stood up, and so I believe it was her essay that she borrowed the title from Booker T. Washington, but based on Booker T. Washington was inspiration for this oration that she gave at at the graduation ceremony. Now, this blows my mind because she stood up as a black student in an all white, and I'll tell you why I think that, all white community. Now, she was one of 25 graduates, and she stood up in front of the entire community. Now, this was at the Opera House, um, and that was at the corner of what is today Church Street and Main Street. So the school, the high school, Union School building at the corner of North Grove and Main Street wasn't big enough had an auditorium, so they would have the 1917 school wasn't built yet. So the one that's there today at the corner wasn't built yet. That did have an auditorium, but the school before that, so didn't. So they would have a graduation down at the Opera House. So the Opera House would be open, and the community would come. And there were 25 graduates, but from all the reports that I saw, it wasn't just parents and grandparents that would come. Graduation was a community event, and as it should be, taxpayers are paying money, and they want to celebrate with the students. So she stood up in front of the entire class and and gave this oration, and they the advertiser said she commenced with the Emancipation Proclamation and spoke of Booker T. Washington and his work. Um, Her speech, uh, I believe might have made people a little uncomfortable, perhaps, from the time period. But the advertiser noted that at the close of Miss Taylor's oration, she was accorded the heartiest applause ever given a graduate of East Aurora High School. Um, to stand up in front of the community and talk about a topic that probably a lot of people didn't want to hear, or people didn't have any exposure to beforehand. And I believe in East Aurora at the time, being a very predominantly white community, um, issues of race and things like that were just not on the radar. And there were racists as well. We can't ignore that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit too. But the fact that she stood up in front of her class and did that. Now, the really key part of that, there's one sentence in the advertiser's account of it that is very revealing, and it's just one sentence. Now, a black student wanting to go to East Aurora High School or any small school, and we have to remember at the time, New York State, we forget that, we think that separate but equal was just a Southern thing, but it was in New York State as well. But as I had said to the East Aurora Bee, when they interviewed me, if you have one black student, separate but equal doesn't mean anything, and it's still not a good thing, but you couldn't have a separate school for one student, essentially. Um, so she, I can't imagine what her uh, fight to get a seat in the classroom of the public school in East Aurora would have been like, just to be honest. Um, there were definitely people who would be against it. But unfortunately, all that sort of thing would not be documented. The newspaper probably didn't get involved. If there was a struggle, the local newspaper probably didn't report on it. And so it would have been something that was happening, but we didn't see, there's no way to document it. So that is lost to history. But the account of her graduation in the East Aurora Advertiser noted, and I just want to make sure I get this correct. In the article, they said Miss Taylor is a young colored girl who has been making a brave fight to secure an education. And they said that in the account of her speech at the graduation ceremony. Miss Taylor is a young girl who has been making a brave fight to secure an education. So to me, that signifies that she wasn't just let into school to secure an education, that somewhere along the line there was a big controversy and she had to fight to attend school here in East Aurora. So her story, and again, we can celebrate that she was the first black graduate and talk just about her. But through her story and the research I've done into Mary Taylor, I have learned so much about what it was like at the time period here in our community. And a lot of us like to think of ourselves as really progressive, and that East Aurora being North, we're not a Southern state. Even after the Civil War, you read all about Reconstruction and the Ku Klux Klan down in the South. And so we just think sometimes, I think erroneously, even that if we are a predominantly white community, um, that we were open-minded and that having a black student attend our schools would not be a big deal. A lot of us want to think that. But the evidence does not support that. Um, and in fact, as I was researching her, and I'm going to put the article up, I'll put a link to the article up in the comments. Again, a lot more details about her. But I discovered, I was trying to figure out, when did she move to East Aurora? Did she grow up here? Who were her parents? And I discovered that her father was named Reuben, and I was looking through census records, and I discovered that he worked, and it was funny, as a funny little story there. I was reading the census, and they're all handwritten, and I saw his name, and they had said they lived on Mechanic Street, which is King Street today, and a house that's no longer there. But it had as his occupation, I was reading it as house builder. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Well, it turned out it was horse trainer when I read it more clearly. So he was a horse trainer in East Aurora. They had moved here sometime in the late 1800s. Probably worked either at the Hamlin Farm, which was on Main Street, or another horse farm in the community. And they lived on King Street. And there, she had siblings. Um, and the census say that her father was widowed, and she had a 24-year-old brother and a 33-year-old sister-in-law and a 22-year-old sister and a 21-year-old brother and an 8-year-old sister. Um, and when she was 16, so when she was about graduating high school, the year before the 1900 census, they had a lot of folks living with themselves, living on what is today King Street. So you can find out this, the family dynamic through the censuses. Those are great. Those are great records. So her mother had passed away, and so she and her father and her siblings and one of her siblings' spouses are living in this house on Mechanic Street, King Street. Um, and the records also, the census records were really good at confirming that she was working during high school. So at the time that she was listed in the East Aurora Advertiser, and she was again one of 25 graduates, and to graduate high school was a very big deal. Still is, but back then it was a really big deal. Not everybody even had the chance to go to high school. So she went to high school, graduated high school, and she was listed among the Regents honor students. So she was a top student, but at the same time in the census she was listed as a domestic servant. So we learned that she was working while going to high school, probably helping to support the family, and when they lived here on King Street. So um, another thing that, in addition to the fact that she had to struggle to attend high school, um, uh, the East Aurora, again, we like to think of ourselves as progressive, that it would be no big deal that a student, even in a predominantly white community, would go to East Aurora High School. But I believe from my research that at the time, the Taylors, Mr. Reuben Taylor and his children, were probably the only black family living in East Aurora. And the reason I say that is in 1901, there's a directory. I won't call it a phone directory because not everyone had a phone, but there's a village directory, and everyone's listed in there, their streets, their occupations, again, confirming what we were learning from the censuses. But they said Taylor, Reuben, and in parentheses COL for colored in the phone book, essentially. No one else got that distinction. So everyone else, their race was not deemed important when it was put in the phone book, but for Mr. Reuben Taylor, it was denoted. So you would, when you were looking up somebody in the phone book, you would know ahead of time that you were going to be meeting a black person if you were going to visit him or calling on him. So the publishers of the phone book, the directory, deemed it important to denote someone's race when they were black. A systematic racism going on there, just even in the phone book. Second, when Mrs. Taylor passed away and I found her obituary, they mentioned her name, comma, a colored woman. Nobody else in the newspaper had their race denoted, but the fact that she was black was mentioned in her obituary, when in fact it wasn't mentioned for anybody else. So again, it just through my research for Mary Taylor, I've discovered some of this racism that was happening. So if it was happening on the level of the phone book and even the newspaper, it certainly was happening socially in the community. And I learned that just by, and I guess I knew it, but it was confirmed and so blatant when I was researching the family of Mary Taylor. And again, the Ku Klux Klan, I've talked about this before. We think of that as a South thing, something during Reconstruction, 1920s. We think of that happening in the South. But in fact, when Mary Taylor was in school, people from East Aurora were attending Ku Klux Klan meetings in Buffalo and in Williamsville. There was actually a meeting here in East Aurora. Um, these meetings were published in the newspaper. I won't go as far to say that the group was the Ku Klux Klan at the time was mainstream, but it certainly wasn't as underground or secret of an organization as we would like that we sometimes think of it as today. Their meetings were publicized, and at one meeting actually that was published in the East Aurora Advertiser talked about people going up to the corner of Main Street and Transit Road and burning a cross. That was discussed it was just put in the newspaper article, and that would be Williamsville today. There were booklets published of people who had gotten a hold of the sign-in sheets for the Ku Klux Klan meetings, and they published the names and occupations and the hometowns of the towns of the people who were attending the Ku Klux Klan meetings. You can Google those online and find them, and they list people from East Aurora, their names, their occupations, if they were a business owner. Um, so it and this was the 1920s. So this was happening. So when Mary Taylor was going to school, was struggling to get an education, as the East Aurora Advertiser said, the Ku Klux Klan was active in our communities. Whether it was up in Williamsville, but members were certainly coming from our community. That's a fact. So this was the atmosphere of East Aurora at the time that Mary Taylor was going to school. When I was talking to the East Aurora Bee reporter, the editor of the Bee, he had asked me about a lot of questions I didn't know the answers to. So I really realized through this process of him bringing Mary Taylor back into our discussion. My latest research, I think, was 2019. So it's been a couple years since I've delved into studying her. Um, I had discovered in a 1905 census that New York State had off-year censuses, so they would do them in the 5 years. Federal censuses would be in the 0 years. I found that she was working as a housekeeper, and that her family was living on Hamburg Street. And one source says that they were living in what used to be the West End Gallery, the old schoolhouse at the corner of Hamburg Street and Douglas Lane, so right across from Key Bank there, and that the family lived there. After that, I've lost her, so I'm going to make it a goal to find her. And I've discussed this before, is roadblocks or dead ends that I've hit in research in the past sometimes have opened up. And a perfect example was Vera Wood, who was the paper girl from the East Aurora Advertiser back in the early 1900s. Her picture with her dad was the publisher, and she was pictured holding copies of the East Aurora Advertiser, and they called her the paper girl. And she had been used in promotions. This image of Vera, the paper girl, was used in images. And for years, the folks at the Advertiser, myself, we were trying to find what happened to Vera Wood, and we couldn't figure it out. Well, with newspapers becoming digitized and available online, I was able to find her. So when I get the time, I'm hoping to find what happened to Mary Taylor, see if she ever got married, probably moved from East Aurora. I didn't find her in the censuses for East Aurora after that. So I'm going to make it a mission to find out where she and her family went, and see if maybe there's descendants around, and bring her into present day. Her dad, I believe, did die shortly after she graduated. Reuben Taylor, there's a Reuben Taylor listed in the obituary in 1903 in the Advertiser, but by then they didn't mention his race in the obituary, so I don't know if it was. I can't say for a fact that it was her father, but I don't know how many Reuben Taylors there would be in East Aurora at the time. One of the things about her dad, and I find this very interesting, so he was a horse trainer um, at one of the horse farms, but he, according to the census, was illiterate, couldn't read. And I just was thinking how proud he must have been sitting at the graduation, assuming that he was there, watching his daughter give this oration to graduate, get a diploma from East Aurora High School, that she was not only a student, but from all the sources I can find, um, an honor student, a regents. She took regents exams. That he didn't have this opportunity, and seeing his daughter graduate from high school. I'm trying to put myself in that position of him watching his daughter graduate. Not only did Mary Taylor uh, graduate East High School, another daughter of his was attending high school. I found her in yearbooks and lists, so we know that not only Mary went, but her sister as well. So I just find that her story fascinating. In addition to it being a great story, and that she herself was an accomplished student and did wonderful things, and entered the history books of East Aurora. Um, her story, by extension, allows us to learn a lot about racism, and talk about things that we might not be comfortable talking about in our small community, and in our very predominantly white community to this day, and and also to discuss and think about, some of the things they were dealing with back then we're still dealing with today. So that over 100, was 120 years, more than 120 years, we're still dealing 120 years later with some of these issues, many of these issues. So her story really helps us delve into some of these issues. So it goes beyond Mary Taylor. It goes into what we were like as a community, what we are like as a community, and I think brings up issues that need to be discussed and talked about. So that's my little chat about Mary Taylor. I again going to I'll put a link to the article and her photo again up so you can see what she looked like. A great portrait of her that is still preserved in the archives of the historian's office. And stay tuned. I will continue to do research about her and see if I find anything more. And then once I do, I will add it. I'll extend the article. I will add more information to tell more of her story. Again, thanks for joining us today. And again, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the comment box, um, or send me a private message. And again, if you like the video, share it. I'm okay with that, certainly. And give me your ideas for topics. I'd love to hear what you're thinking, or if you have any questions about East Aurora history or any history, small town history. It doesn't have to be about East Aurora. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.